Okay, now? Right now, here we go.
Welcome to Five Points Gallery in the heart of downtown Torrington, a key element of the city's restoration. We have Judith McAhone, who is the gallery director and has laryngitis, so we're not asking her to speak, but she and Carl Goulet operate the gallery as director and curator, and Carl did an amazing job of hanging my work. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Judith, for spotting that work in my website. Ice and snow is the theme that was established by Judith and Carl for this exhibition. And there are 3 galleries with 3 exhibiting artists, and they're all worthy of your attention. Ms. Fetter in the small gallery and Herpish in the large Lower East gallery has an extraordinary body of work. Ice and snow is integral to my genetic makeup. And it only occurred to me this morning, though this painting has been in our house where I've grown up since 1945 by my grandfather, Nils Zetterstrom, who was born in 1874. And so I have been going to the ice and snow for quite a while and loving that landscape and the wildness that it contains. I was thinking of driving in today and referring to Thoreau's, "In wildness is the salvation of the world, or the preservation of the world." And he said that 160 years ago. It's more true today than ever. So my father picked up the tradition as a cross-country skier and came to the United States in the 1920s, skied on the US 1932 Olympic cross-country ski team. And because that was hosted in Lake Placid, that became a really big deal during the Depression, that it became the recreational outlook that was most exciting for the culture. And North Canaan had a ski jump, and Norfolk had a ski jump, and Salisbury still has a ski jump. And my father was lured down to Norfolk after the Olympics to cut cross-country ski trails in Norfolk opposite the Blackberry River Inn to help make Connecticut the ski capital, Norfolk the ski capital of Connecticut. It's hilarious, but it was all across the street from the ski jump. The ski trains would come up from New York, interchange in Canaan, head eastward to Norfolk, and stop at the Blackberry River Inn, where you could get off. And hey, you could have your ski weekend in the country. So I came around a dozen years later onto the scene, and by the 1950s was picking up photography as a Boy Scout merit badge and in the high school darkroom. By the time I went through my college years at Colorado College, starting out as a botany major, then shifted to sculpture, returned to the Northeast and went to Pratt Institute as part of my strategy to deflect the selective service from relocating me to Asia. I'll show you a picture as we wrap around, but because I was able to convince the higher powers of the authenticity of my conscientious objector's claim, I was fortunate enough to take a position as teaching photography in Washington, D.C. in 1968 to 1970. That was a very fortunate alternative service. The work that I created back then, 50 years ago, is now installed at the Smithsonian, and they're acquiring that entire body of work as well. So I come back to Connecticut, and I'm confronted with the proposal for the Route 7 and Route 44, missing link from Hartford, superhighway expansions, clover leafing in my garden on Clayton Road, and alerting me to get into gear to oppose a misguided expansion of our reliance on the automobile, and regardless of the impact on the environment and the transformation of Litchfield County that would have ensued. So we did prevail by 1973. The proposal was defeated. I had worked with Ralph Nader, establishment of the Connecticut Citizen Action Group, and the Ecology League and BLEC locally in Northwest Connecticut. I gave my 3-projector slideshow on the benefits of multimodal transportation as opposed to over-reliance. Of course, then came the oil embargo, and that kind of sealed the deal for us. However, we haven't since learned our lesson 45 years later, unfortunately. That was a exhausting and committed endeavor, such that when it was off my shoulders, I hopped on Amtrak and ferried out across the plains to Colorado, joined friends from Colorado College, camped out, helped build a homeowner-built house, and just began a looser exploration with the camera. But I had carried with me this way of seeing things from the visuals that I was presenting in my slideshows about roadside impact. But I then personalized that in a way, rather than leave it in the didactic mode that was part of my 3 projectors. Can you believe it? Setting all this equipment up, even in the state capitol, and hanging seamless paper 14 feet wide across the backside of the Senate office building, and speaking there with Lowell Weicker and Deputy Commissioner of the DEEP, and Ed Fales from Northwest Connecticut, and other environmentalists, and making the point and eventually succeeding. So that following year, I began shooting, we'll see the photograph as we wrap around here, from the train heading for Colorado and in Colorado, and then started noticing kind of an interesting introduction of elements in black and white that included this sweep of motion in the foreground and a kind of interpretation of the landscape. In December of that year, I hopped on a trip to Moscow and Leningrad for $400 for 9 days, and shooting my 35mm camera throughout with no assignment or anything, but came back and created a little 20-print portfolio called White Russia. This is from Leningrad, and it's pedestrians, and it's in several museum collections, and you're going to see it in the original scale down at the far end, which is 4 images from Russia. But here it is, because it doubles into the portfolio called the moving point of view. What it reveals is, if you're all welcome to come in much closer, the relative speed as one eye on a bus passing by these Ruskies on their way to work in the morning, and the extraordinary architecture of Leningrad, of course, St. Petersburg, is in the background, and the sweep of motion does a very interesting thing. I mean, they almost look like paper doll cutouts here. So they unify what's going on in the foreground by softening it to the degree that they all became sort of unified as a group. Please raise any questions that occur to you where you might want me to amplify. But what we might do is just come in a little closer. What I thought of doing here was having us look at the actual prints together rather than do the digital lecture projection, because all we see now is digital projections and images and screens. So this is a very different mechanical product that has, I mean, there is a light bulb in the enlarger, 250 watts, that goes on for 9 seconds when I expose the film, the paper rather. But other than that, it's me looking through the magnifier and reaching up for the focus handle and getting the focus right, and then taking that paper and putting it through those baths of chemicals and so forth. It's a labor-intensive act. So 73, 77, I'm driving. Caroline is at the wheel. This became one of my early iconic images, and everybody knew the Four Maples of Sharon, Connecticut, in the Oblong Valley that other photographers had, like Bill Binson, had photographed and made posters of and so forth. So what I've managed to do in a foggy, snowy, wintry December day, God, in 77, 42 years ago, is my math right? 52 years ago, 77, yes, it's 42 years ago, is pick a shutter speed. I'm in the passenger seat, so I'm not steering at the same time. And the sweep of openness up to what is, just barely visible as a fence row here, a clean fence row. I defy any of you to find such a thing in the current landscape. 4 healthy, vigorous maple trees, and then a blast of darkness coming in this unformed foreground conifer and deciduous tree kind of mixed together, resolving to the stillness back here. Any comments, questions? Keep going.
Beautiful.
It's gorgeous.
Speak up, yeah?
It's gorgeous. It really is.
Yeah, you're with me. Okay, so the trees are still growing there, but nearly half a century later, they're not quite as healthy as they are. And of course, as with all of our roadsides over the past half century, progressively and now exponentially are being impacted by half a dozen or a dozen invasive plants that are filling in the spaces very aggressively. In Maine woods, 1983, you know what? I'll do this later. So I'm in 35 millimeter here. In 1983, I buy a used Fujica 6x9 centimeter camera, a roll film camera, 2¼ 3¼ inch negative, 8 shots per roll. And so I'm now upgrading to medium format. And my whole idea along was, having started in 4x6 and moved up to 8x12 and 16x20 and 20x30 and 40x56 eventually. My ultimate goal is still not a bad idea. I should have gone to billboard size so I could have had an art exhibition on the side of Route 7, the very highway that I tried to reserve as the, but we've got plenty of billboards in Canaan, and quite honestly, what are they advertising? Berkshire Distillery, McDonald's, some artwork up there might be an interesting idea. If anybody wants to encourage that idea, I'll be happy to talk with you. Or fund it, even better. Okay, in Maine woods, I'm shooting the camera, which I think is right in here. Hold on. think it's in the background, with a wide-angle lens. So that, of course, distorts the space. It makes the distant more distant and the foreground closer. And in this case, I'm actually driving in this direction in my 79 Saab, 69 Saab, and holding the wheel. And this wonderful space comes up with this grove of birches with a background of conifers. So immediately there's this distinctive and defined little group of trees. And I'm passing in this direction and I'm shooting out the window at perhaps an eighth or a quarter or a 15th of a second, depending on my speed. In other shots that I did from trains when I was on Amtrak at 80 miles an hour, I'd be shooting at 125th. You would still get that sweep of motion. But here I'm letting the panning back on the space and synchronizing with certain things out there that are going by at a certain distance back, whereas not synchronizing with what's behind it and not synchronizing with what's in front of it. So I'm getting a dramatic sweep in the foreground, but this unbelievable and really unpredictable circumstance of vividly defined edges in here, which are a way that I was unable to see, but I was able to let happen.
How come the center seems much more focused than the edges?
The center, it's a function of the stretching of the wide-angle lens impact and the bending of the film plane during the exposure and rotating as I'm tracking. So the edges are being swept with more momentum than the pivot points. And somehow or other, there's kind of a plane that works in a little closer here and then moves further back in here. Right in front of this tree and behind this tree, the motion has abstracted these trees and has clarified this one. So it's the good fortune of, what is the phrase go? It's a favors the well-informed mind. What is it? Good luck and favors the well-informed mind. It is good luck here, but I am an informed photographer. And hey, by now, I've been doing this for 10 years. So I have honed a certain skill, unlike any other vorticist, if you will, or experimental photographer, and sort of woven in this cinematic aspect into the still. So, got to have a car or a moving vehicle. There's one shot, it's not hanging here, where I did it on foot, and you got to have enough presence of mind to be able to not drive off the road at the same time. Now, I still find that my attention is easily distracted by the roadsides that I observe to this day. And Janet keeps reminding me, Tom, pay attention. And so, at any rate, so far, no other animals or people were injured in the pursuit of this art project, I should say. Okay, so here, and thank you, Carl, for what you picked out. Much appreciated. This is from the train, going down to New York City on Dover Plains, and so I spent endless days and thousands of miles riding the train, standing up back in those days, the rules were a little loose, so I could ride in the vestibule, and they'd let me open the window, and I'm sure I was totally illegal, but I would just be sort of watching what's coming at me, and I'd be bouncing around on that platform and actually damaging my cartilage in my knees, and so when I see that little thing open up there, I grab that shot, and it's very abstracted to a bend in the road, Swamp Road, I call it, and hard to say what the subject matter is, but I guess I would ask, does it evoke a certain mood? Carl, why did you happen to pick this one? And so what it also does is kind of interesting. It gets to the graphite aspect, graphite-like aspect of the silver print, which is to say, this could have been, I don't know, think of the right artist. Who would have drawn that in pencil as just a little bit of a mirage? Certainly someone out there. I don't know who that artist might be, but that's what it is getting close to. Down here, let's see, I am in the driver's seat, but someone is grabbing the wheel for me, and I'm again with the big camera, I'm spinning that thing around, and it's almost an entire circle down here. If you have a chance to come up later, and then you will see growing out of that circle is a couple of trees that are as sharp-edged as can be, and what surrounds them is an interpretation of twigs, branches, and the competitive chaos that's in nature. So it adds I don't know, it's just, I've got this in the next size up like that as well. How is it justified as being a photograph versus just being a mental experiment? I don't know, somehow beauty seems to be emitting from it, at least in my mind. In this shot, 1974, I'm on that train to New York, and I'm so grateful for the fact that the abandoned car was left there, and that's probably a 47 Plymouth or something like that, and here it is in 54, 40 years later, that car is still there. It looks like it had been, maybe even has a number on the side, maybe it was one of those racetrack fairs. What are they up in Lebanon Valley? What are they?
Looks like Demolition Derby.
Demolition Derby, yeah, maybe that's it. But look at it, the whole ass end is chewed off there from what appears to be a collision. And there's that front door, it's ajar. Was this the end of a chase scene? We don't know, but it was acquired a few years later by the Museum of Modern Art, along with a beautiful print of Houstonic Wetlands by John Zarkowski, the preeminent photography curator of the time. So, I got reinforced that playing with this stuff was, couldn't be called art. And we'll look at a few more moving point of view around the corner. In the 73, as I mentioned back there, I did go on that Russian trip. And this kind of harkens back to almost, this, other than this interpretation, almost quasi-documentary photography. Now, December, I would recommend go to the Soviet Union. I don't know what it would be like now. The place scares me just to think about it, quite honestly. I'm not into autocrats and dictators. But, you know, this, for pure architectural elegance, and this little fairyland scene of kids with a sled and skis, what could be more dreamlike? In the homage to Lenin at Lenin's tomb in Red Square, the pigeon makes the photograph. And with that 35 millimeter Nikkor mat and 28 millimeter lens, always at my chest, I got it within a fraction of a second of observing what was going on. This then appeared on the op-ed page of the New York Times, and a year later, along with 2 or 3 other of my Russian series. And the progression is here, and then you see in this photograph the progression, and Lenin's tomb is in the distance. And so she has come down through the obligation of honoring Lenin and finding the stationed official photographer there, ready to capture her and, as proof of her dedication to the state. So this as a pair is actually of interest. And then here, we've talked about this already. So as we move around the corner, we're going to go pick up a few more moving point of view. And come on in here closer. So these are pretty graphically strong compared to some of those softer images. You can slide your chairs around. There's a couple of chairs right here on this side of the post. Okay, 35, medium format 35. 1980, Deep River / Epiphany. What I managed to do with the movement here is fuse the earth, air, fire, water, the sun setting right there, the Housatonic River, bend on River Road going up on the east side of the Housatonic. And, you know, that mackerel sky, the flame, and, you know, gorgeous colors, but converted into black and white. And then what's going on in the clouds is kind of mirrored down here in the sweep of branches in the foreground. In the Corcoran Gallery of Art, which now is owned by the National Gallery of Art. Actually, another Sheffield picture called Branches. And so again, it's getting to this gestural drawing and depiction of a field in the depth of field, which is in the near ground, but not so near ground where this sweep is distorted by motion, but it's creating this scrim of texture here. This is that little dirt road on the east side of the Sheffield Covered Bridge, back in the days when you used to drive through the bridge. And as I pointed out to Judith before, you couldn't take this picture anymore because this would all be invasive vegetation, a belt here that would obstruct your visual penetration of the space. The roadside is a corridor for the distribution and, shall we say, rapid and vigorous growth of all invasive plants, because there's light and exposure there. There are birds in those corridors dropping seeds, and it's a rapid means of distribution and spread of those plants. this shot, I was thinking I should bring over my grandfather's photograph, where that kind of return into the deep space in the far corner is happening here in 1984. I'm shooting with a 35 millimeter here, and the headlights, and fresh laden snow on Wildcat Hollow Road in my Saab. And you know, it just becomes a very evocative sense of journeying on a winter's night. There's enough reality in the space about the real world, but then there's this unreality of the illumination that occurs here. And again, extremely fortuitous that I was able to steer, expose, looking through, and choosing the right shutter speed. At some point in my past, I could remember what the shutter speed was for all of these. And, you know, at least for a few years afterwards, you know, that's getting into that eighth of a second right there. And, you know, hey, I'm not driving that fast. So I wanted to pull up just a couple of additional prints to kind of round out. This is where that started out. There's that 1973 shot in Colorado. And this was the horror that I was hoping to prevent in my backyard, that, you know, carving of the landscape and shaping the contours of the interchange. But it's actually a gorgeous little vignette of what's going on in there. Look at the fossils, fuels coming out of that grater across there, and then the roller behind it just recontouring the planet. And, you know, no little human figures to be seen anywhere, just these machines at work. And so it's also got this wonderful diagonal and the sweep in the foreground, the shoulder, and then you see the curve of the exit here, or the entrance ramp and so forth. It's just a wonderful little playing in the sandbox. Big guys playing in the sandbox. So I wish Power were here. Judith, where's Judith? Is she around the corner? Judith, here's a shot. Power Booth at the wheel, his 59 Chevy pickup going down Route 7 in Sheffield into Canaan. And me, I'm beginning to experiment still. I'm even shooting the little flash on that knicker mat. And, you know, it's wonderfully graphically intense. But hey, later we let it flow a little more by not using the fret flash, which is like a thousandth of a second or something like that. But what then happens is, okay, 74. 6 years later, and kind of a nice shot here in terms of comparing those two. Interior space, a tunnel on 395 leaving DC, and the remarkable thing about it is, a year later Sam Wagstaff buys it. He had bought a few of my prints. And there's I was fortunate in my life in so many ways, but I got tuned into some of the major collectors back in that era when Sam Wagstaff was basically redefining the art world and making photography worthy of as a fine art. And quite honestly, galleries were popping up all over Manhattan and New York, and Wagstaff put together the largest private collection of photographs in the world, 26,000 photographs, sold them in 1984 to the Getty Museum for $4.5 million. And that collection is worth probably 40 times that amount now. But it established the photography department at the Getty. Of that 26, now I get to brag, of those 26,000 photographs, 7 of them were mine. Of the 147 that the Getty put together for the traveling exhibition of the Samuel Wagstaff collection, one of mine is in here. So, you know, what are the odds? Christian was going to calculate that for me. But so there's the shot right there. And, you know, next to this really kind of grotesque imagery of nudes and with sexual overtones and so forth. So clearly, Paul Martineau, the god Paul, I don't know if you'll be listening to this at some point, chose one that also had sexual interpretive capability, believe it or not. One could imagine, you know, that the excitement of that era and the experimentation by that art community and Wagstaff, who actually spent time growing up in Northwest Connecticut and went to Hotchkiss School and went to Yale, and then I actually was in the Normandy invasion. You know, he had a real life. He was the curator at the Athenaeum, the Wadsworth Athenaeum, and then left for the Detroit Art Institute, was kind of the bad boy of the curatorial world, and then at a certain point decided to focus. Actually, he was collecting paintings. He sold his painting collection. He got a lot of money because he was smart. Actually, he was one of the early curators focusing in on minimalism, and created some pretty important shows in his tenure in the museum field. But he also then said, okay, you should go and see Paul Walter, or you should go and see Richard Menschel. And so I got to show my stuff to these guys, and they bought them, you know, and they, you know, the photography department is the Richard Menschel photography department at the Museum of Modern Art, and so forth and so on. So I was in with the good crowd, and since I was doing something that was sort of, I guess, cutting edge, you could say, for the time, the reason I wanted to show some of these is we're pretty much looking at the natural woodlands landscape of the side of the road. Some of the constructs that I also photographed, and this is also in Sharon, Connecticut, by the way, the picket fence that's no longer there, but wow. I managed to get that, so I got those pickets here that dissolved, such that the thing looks like some kind of the visualization of a chord of music. That one at the end of the Beatles album, and then contrast that landscape roadside to this one on the side of I-84, and this is a domicile. So somehow what the still photograph of this could have been elegant, perhaps, and you know, perfect for New England Magazine or something cover. But I took it beyond that point. It's actually in the Berkshire Museum collection. And actually, this one is in no collection. Then, okay, the side of the road, a pedestrian. Adding the motion to surround this, a man in black with his black garbage bag over his shoulder. I'm presuming his entire worldly belongings, and himself is in this figure. And the transformation with the emotion even makes it feel lonelier and more severe than it might otherwise. It sort of puts you on that long walk with him and into his torment, I would only guess. Okay, I think we're getting close to the end of the moving point of view. 1986, crossing from Dallas to LA on Amtrak. I could have easily gone blind. This train is going fast, but look at these beautiful old telephone lines. This is film noir in a still photograph. You could imagine that image extended for minutes in cinema. And I managed to capture the accuracy and the clear definition of those lines that then just dissolve to that point of infinity. Toward the end of the collection, my friend Jay Pickering and I are traveling in California. He's driving and we're racing to get to LAX, so we've got to get back to Connecticut. And we're just pulling into the airport and I get that shot. This is the concluding shot in the series, by the way. And it's got that kind of dark feeling to it, foreboding. And some of these have that too. You know, some of them are kind of uplifting and gorgeous. A couple of odd ones that I thought might be worth showing to you. This reminds me of the work of Lee Friedlander. At a certain point, he would go out into Central Park and photograph the undefined, unlike the trees, which are so clearly classical in their formulaic structure. This is just a brush that has become a tapestry of sorts, and shall we say, is wonderfully intricate and, shall we say, very abstracted. This is also kind of a bleak image of after the Yellowstone fires of the 80s, and in a sense, you think about the amount of fires in the West these days, you know, kind of anticipates the fried planet that we are moving to become. And then any questions about the moving point of view? Does this make sense at all? Okay. Trees, they're kind of easier to look at. These are classic images, and but likewise, they do involve a huge amount of exploration. You know, some of them are so clear and obvious. In early 1979, the Twin Oaks in Saul Sharon, really famous, the most famous trees in Connecticut other than the pinch-out sycamore in Simsbury. Now they're past tense. You would have thought they should have been cabled extensively. They weren't. They busted apart. But hey, the temper, say again?
250 years, or was it that?
Yeah, 200, yeah, it's a little hard to measure. Okay, so decline and death are part of nature. In the presence of invasives, that process is accelerated significantly. And here we have black locust succumbing to bittersweet vine. This is a phenomenon that is sweeping the Northeast and is in some ways what it comes. This is the tree killing invasive, as I refer to it in my lectures. And it's going north on Route 7 just out of Canaan into Sheffield. The grove of red pines that were planted in the late 50s, early 60s when the 7A went through are now just collapsing like pickup sticks. And the guy that mows the shoulder that used to be sort of the gateway to the Berkshires as a scenic, high-value scenic road is now becoming garbage, lake strewn, garbage of invasive collapse. This happens to be Williamstown, Hope Farm, which is an old Vanderbilt estate up there. A little copse of blue spruce. Again, snow becomes the thing that softens the whole experience and really transforms it. Now, because of the needle cast disease that blue spruce get, because hey, they're Colorado trees, they're intended for arid environments. They are more subject to the fungal needle disease. So, you know, now they prune them up from the bottom and they look like crap, basically. Here, man, they look elegant. This tree is from 1991. This is 98. This is 2012. That tree just caught it out of the corner of my eye as we were heading down to catch that LAX plane. And, you know, then we spent 3 hours there. That's why we got so late. I was photographing the universe in this case. And to find the center of the universe is a very hard thing to do. This is kind of like the Big Bang, you know, it's just opening up into this incredible statement. And I think I've concluded that 91, let's see, 30 years later, coming up in 2021, I should probably get out there and see if I can find it again.
What kind of tree is it?
It's a coast oak. You asked that question, I didn't.
Yeah, I did.
You did.
And
yeah.
where?
It's on the, Route 1 is right here. Pacific Ocean is about here. So if you drive down Route 1, keep your eyes open on the passenger side, you might spot it.
And how large have you printed it?
Well, I actually have an 8 by 12 print of it, only one, however, which was a special order some 30 years ago. You bring up an interesting point. Scale. We're even going to look at some smaller trees on the wall just around the corner here as we wrap up. And that's what I started printing them at. And I even brought that. I'll show you a small print of a gorgeous 77 shot. I moved up to this, actually a little smaller than this, and then I thought, okay, I'll be generous, 5 by 8 inches. I wanted to keep these pretty intimate and as a viewing experience, kind of at arm's length, rather than, you know, across the wall, across the space. You can appreciate Maine woods pretty well. This would hold up beautifully, gigantic. I mean, one print of that, I guess. I was kind of focused in on collectors who, you know, didn't want to own like 4-foot, 8-foot photographs. You know, giantism is a big thing in photography these day and age because you've got this 40-inch roll paper. You can print out the longest photograph you can generate by fusing. You could have one photograph wrap this whole gallery if you wanted to. So, okay, there's another blizzard shot. It was in New York. My mother's old 73 Valiant. Visiting my friends, and blizzard's coming in, and they're saying, Tom, you should stay in town and wait till the blizzard is over. I said, no, I have to be out in it. So I get up to Hyde Park, and I'm hunkering down. The car is parked right here, and I'm, you know, got my camera, and I'm working out the details, and then I'm opening the car door, and I'm using the car as my shield against the north wind coming in behind me. I couldn't have shot it without a car there. It just would have messed up the camera too badly. And wow, I got it. Nothing, you know, this involved crawling around on my hands and knees underneath a weeping beech in Rhode Island for probably a good hour, you know, again, trying to sort out a pattern that made sense out of what's a lot of different vectors in there. And so I did get it. It kind of comes down from this congealing attachment near the top, and it just drapes down all the way. It's a remarkable tree on a estate which is a historic preserve. Let's switch over to these things here. How are we doing on time, Julie? 5 o'clock, oh, we're not bad. We supposedly have a few minutes. Okay, so I guess, hey, listen, these are small, so why don't I step back? Everybody just take a look at these so you can absorb them, and then I'm going to pull out a few other things to show you, and then we wrap up. This table ain't great, but it might do. So the other great, shall we say, fortune that I had was the Library of Congress has 5 million photographs and negatives in it, and they own about 47 of my photographs. And so at the bicentennial of the Library of Congress in 2000, they published this book. And so this is my little story about the American elm. Okay, America, eyes of the nation, e pluribus unum, the suffragettes, the American elm. So, of the 5 million in the collection, 2 of them are in here, and there might be a couple hundred illustrations and photographs in here. This gentleman claims that only I could have taken these pictures of this elm. But at any rate, I began shooting it in '93 through the '90s, and it got into the library collection. But of course, being acutely aware of the terminal effect of Dutch elm disease, was concerned about its survival. Here it is again in 2002. So that became the premiere for the formation of Elm Watch in 1999. Thus begins my long distraction from the fine art of photography. And as an easily distracted artist, I began to explore American elm restoration. It coincides with the release of disease-resistant elms by the National Arboretum, and Elm Watch is formed with a small board. We go around trying to get elms adopted so they can be injected like this one and preserved on the landscape. From my youth, I carried this intimacy of the experience of the elm as working for my father and climbing up those damn things and pruning them out and trying to save them by sanitation, cutting out the dead wood and so forth. So I hated to see him go, and quite honestly, as I was so intimately aware of what happened, I would, it was a guarantee. This tree would not be here as it is still today without our intervention. The probability that Dutch elm disease would have taken it out 10 or 15 or 18 years ago is extremely high. Here's a moving point of view from 1978. This is in Sharon, Connecticut, also on Route 41, coming up from Armenia Union down there. And look at that roadside of a staggered array of American elms still standing as sentinels on the landscape. Our roadsides, there's nothing comparable to this anymore. Hey, listen, this should be in the Sharon History Center collection, by the way. We should talk about that. So, hey, these elms are all gone. Hey, they didn't get injected. Elm Watch didn't come around until 20 years later. And so we don't see this anymore. This was not uncommon in my youth. And of course, back in the 30s, when my parents first bought the land in the quarry, Canaan had hundreds and hundreds of elms still growing on the street. Now, Dutch elm disease was introduced into North America in 1930-31, and it spread rapidly, okay? So within 2 decades, we lost 77 million trees. And now we're down to a fraction of 1% of what existed. So, hey, it was a good thing to do, but boy, it sure does distract you from making art when you're out there trying to convince people that your beautiful tree is going to be dead at some unpredictable time in the future. It looks green to me, but we did preserve about 100 trees, believe it or not, in the tri-state area, from Williamstown to Goshen and over into New York State. This tree, so you'll appreciate this. Speak for the trees. Christian knows that's what I try to do in Canaan. Not always successfully, but there it is, embossed on the front. So it became kind of an iconic image. This is a book put together by Andrea Friesen of the Friesen Gallery in Seattle and Ketchum, Idaho. And, all the good guys are in here with their tree images, hey, including me, and even Yoko Ono. Odd expression. Yeah, okay, the Starn twins. There's their weeping beach, okay? They're like notorious artists who don't know anything, or do know something about conservation, but don't practice it. They use Scotch tape and, improperly, their stuff is meant to deteriorate. At any rate, it's an interesting collection, and I'm happy to be in it. The wrap-up is, let's see, in Connecticut in 96 or so, I go up onto Canaan Mountain in what might have been called the blizzard of that year, whatever that was called year, I'm not sure now. And that's at, hey, that's barely 1,000 feet. Here I'm at 11,000 feet. So one of the things that this ice and snow thing is about is going to the mountains. And this is Colorado, and I'm snowshoeing in there. And I'm coming out at dark, so I'm shall we say, overextending my time in the field to the point where I'm in jeopardy. But, because I'm a good Boy Scout, I could figure out how to get back down to where the van was and where I camped out that night. And I survived. This is the oldest tree species in terms of age on the planet, the bristlecone pine, in the White Mountains of California on the Nevada border, also at 11,000 feet. Interesting things happen up there at tree line. In limestone soils, where basically no other tree species grows, but these grow for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years. Unbelievable. This guy is dead. After they die, they stand for hundreds and hundreds of years. They don't rot up there. They erode from the sand and the wind. That's how they resolve into the transformation, ongoing transformation. 2005, limber pine on Donner Pass. I called Janet on my cell phone. I got a signal up there. But again, the wind is coming behind me. I'm hunkered down and I'm shielding things like this, and I'm getting the shot. And so I'm right at the edge of the tree line, and really at the edge of, let's see, January or whatever month it was. I left San Francisco because there was a snowstorm coming in. I wanted to get up there before the snowstorm. We kind of arrived together. There's that ice and snow theme that you've identified is not a simple happenstance. You've got to think about it. Now, this last storm of a week ago, I was focusing on other things, and I was not out there shooting. This is at 9,000 feet. There's no snow in here, but it's one of my, shall we say, more notable photographs from Tibet, from my Faces of China shoot in 1981. And it's just elegantly beautiful. Closing out on this series, this is, I just wanted to show you this. So the American Elm series ended up being the American Elm in 4 seasons: summer, fall, winter, and spring. And that's what that looks like. So ultimately, the Library of Congress bought all of them.